Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today, I have a very interesting guest and a friend and colleague, Kartik Ram. Kartik has a very interesting journey from the music side of the world to the finance side of the world. And now he is in financial advising, fintech, and spends a lot of time all over the world trying to create spaces where you can actually have interesting conversations around wealth creation and future longevity. So please join me in welcoming Karthik.
Thanks so much, Doctor. Such a pleasure to be here.
Talk about your journey. You grew up not in the US, went into music. Talk about your family, where you grew up, how that shaped yourself, the point of going into music, and now where you are, having been to Stanford and got your MBA and business degrees. This is a very interesting pivot.
We all underestimate what we can accomplish in maybe 1, 2, or 3 years, and we overestimate everything else. So in my mind, I always had a vision for my life built around combining the creative side of my life and the business or family and professional side of my life. I was a different kind of a student, always interested in solving problems that others weren't working on. And you can turn out to be a starving artist, or you can figure out an economic medium that makes it work. I came to America thinking I was going to be in the, publishing and music business, which worked out great for a minute. I got a degree in audio engineering, grew up in Delhi. So there was really no outlet for that. So coming to America was really the only way. Made a pit stop in Dubai and realized that education and all of the whole world of broadcast back then was very analog, and I was a digital guy. So I moved to Silicon Valley in the early 90s and never looked back. Technologies were just getting going with streaming and what were then data centers. And now they all are focused on AI, but then watched companies create e-commerce, and Amazon started. And it was very hard not to make money because you just had to get employed by somebody that had a greater vision than yours. And they were able to attract the capital, and you join them and you learn a lot, and then you go on and do your own thing. And I think that's what this whole kind of brain was for me. So attending Stanford in class of 99 and then being a part of several public companies, I had the bug to go back to roots, if you will. Went back to Dubai in 2006, and it was just before the global financial crisis.
Hold on. I'm going to take you back to Delhi, right?
Oh, fantastic.
So our listeners can actually understand the childhood that you went through that allowed you to absorb this entrepreneurial spirit.
The environment was amazing. I grew up in a creative household, architects, professors, and in an intellectual environment where we were always reading and thinking and questioning. And I think people that question status quo and trends and counter trends are frankly the ones that end up solving a lot of problems because they're never happy with the way things are. But rather than complain about it, they figure out a solution. My family was a bit bohemian. There was not much money, but there was a lot of ideas.
So you went to school in Delhi.
I went to school in Delhi.
Which school did you go to?
It was called St. Xavier's. It was a Jesuit school built around experiential education, if you will. We were all about the after school. And I was a part of the choir, which you see now in my rock opera involvement and all the other things that I'm doing. And I was involved in theater, which obviously was very much a dying art even back then. But it's interesting how these formative things helped me develop perfect pitch and play music, play the keys. And then when I got into the music school or business school, everyone was like, how do you remember everything? Like, how do you remember the lecture without taking a single note? And it's because of my training growing up in a more creative environment where I had to visually represent everything in my mind as a mini movie. I credit my photographic memory to that. But yeah, it was a great background, very functional, very forward moving, but also not one where I was limited to becoming a doctor or engineer. There was no preconceived notions in my household. And I think a lot of us that essentially turned out into something slightly different than what someone else would have imagined essentially had this kind of a creative household growing up.
Just for our listeners, right? This very important point in terms of the ability for kids to grow up and explore what they are capable of, because the household allows you to do that. rather than boxing you in. Particularly those of us that grew up in India, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer. Again, just as a side, is a fantastic way to learn how to memorize things. Because as a actor, you're actually memorizing all your lines. And
Exactly.
I know my youngest son went to school and he could memorize the whole play. And it was just fantastic.
I never thought of it that way, but that's a good point. Scripts, locations, intonations, accents, innuendo. You're memorizing everything spatially, not just the words on paper.
Exactly. So that's a great formative way. And that's what I really want to get out of you is what were these formative environments. So from India, you went to Dubai and then came to school in the US.
I got into Berklee College of Music and Dartmouth, ended up graduating and essentially looked at the world as, you know what, it's 1995. No one has a job, but there's this thing in Silicon Valley they call the internet. I'm going to go check it out. So I jumped in a car from Los Angeles, where I was, and landed in San Jose in a town called Los Gatos and never looked back. In Silicon Valley, much like Bangalore and other tech hubs, the magic is if you leave one thing, there's something better waiting for you always. And that's the beauty of this jobless recovery we have. I heard yesterday, people that leave aren't thinking, oh my God, where am I going to find my next job? They start a company. And I think that magic is what kept me positive and forward looking rather than going, oh no, my music degree was worthless. Now I got to go find a new life skill. Because I think the skill that we've developed in our lives is different than the skills we went to school for. So I became a deal maker. I was raising funds. I was into corporate development and helping companies tell their investors the right story and essentially managing people's reputations.
By the way, just for our listeners that may not know, he threw the name around very lightly that he went to Berklee School of Music, one of the most premier school of music in the US. So clearly there was this strain of music learning in you. Now you're in the Valley, you're doing this work, you're kind of dabbling between tech and finance. Talk a little bit about how that then evolved into what you're doing today.
Yeah, it's funny. I was a member of a car club, Ferrari Club of San Francisco, and we would go to Napa on the weekends. And I was the only one that scraped all their money together to buy a car. Everyone else was either wealthy or a big corporate success. And so one of them looked like a rock star, and I approached him. Turned out he was the vice chairman of the Charles Schwab Corporation, and he gave me a role, and I joined Schwab. And then one thing led to another. And it's been 25 years now in private wealth, private banking, and honestly, private equity. Because once you make a little money and you recognize how the flywheel of capital works, it's very hard not to take on projects of your own. So in the mid 2010s, I had an exit from a fintech company. And I thought, great, I've got capital and I've got some ideas. I'm going to go out on my own and do some things. So I launched a fund, and I was able to then go back and make a lot of the investments that I always dream about being a part of. But in my present day, because I've lived in multiple countries, but I now live in the greater Seattle area, it's a very expensive time from a health insurance standpoint, from a, retirement savings and all of that. And unless you have a highly funded company, it's very hard to make it as a solo entrepreneur. So I decided to go back to finance and work in it. So I'm in the private banking space, launching a boutique for a very large bank. But it's quite a good position because I do what I'm best at, building relationships, managing expectations, and solving people's problems.
These are great skill sets to have, right? I had a guest 2 days ago. She's in the wellness business. And she talked about her 5 steps of what one needs to do to be well. One of the steps that she said was relationships. How do you make healthy relationships and how do you have conversations with people? That healing and well-being doesn't happen just because you're on your own. So talk a little bit about, on one side, you are in the wealth management space, but you have lots of other things going around, right? You're doing things with different kinds of initiatives, your music and your car collection. So talk a little bit about what are some of the other things that you're doing that is bringing both joy and enjoyment, but also adding value.
That's a magical question because a past mentor always told me have a primary and a secondary. We're not measured in life by our secondaries, so we can make them as creative and as exotic and as zigzag as we want to. It's the primary that everyone looks at us on. So my primary is my employer, and I'm very good at what I do, and it's regulated. So you really can't do anything else on the side. So I don't, but I pursue my passions, right? And growing up, my passions were around giving new music artists a chance. I once thought I would donate money to artists so that they can cut their demos, involved in the arts and the outdoor parks, the national parks, in terms of being a donor and getting people to realize that there's places hidden in plain sight that they can go out 2 hours away from wherever they are and have a great experience. So I've been doing a lot of off-roading. I've got a collection of off-road vehicles with winches and roof racks and trails, whether Z-Wagons or Jeeps or whatever. And then also these sports cars, which I love to take on the track. And it's interesting, I've got the Formula One Mercedes Regalia today because it's the game in Melbourne this weekend. And I really became a fan of this whole notion of sports and entertainment as recreation. Besides pickleball and all these things, I thought, you know what, let me really follow a sport and really know everything about it, where I introduce my clients in wealth management to the sport. So I've been kind of a brand ambassador for Formula One, taking families and friends to games. The best things in life are free except Formula One. And so I really enjoy combining arts, culture, and recreation, but not doing it for any economic gain whatsoever, because A, I can't, and B, that would color my perspective if it required time of mine. And I find myself almost having infinite time as a result. I come home at 4 or 5, and then I have this whole afterlife. And it's so exciting because it could be detailing my car, it could be going to a show, it could be trying to do something on the track for a little while, or it could be going to Bellevue Club and playing pickleball, which is what I intend to do later.
To talk a little bit about how all of these things tie into how you see the world getting shaped, right, from your eye.
Well, it's interesting. I think we live in a time where free thinkers and people that are against the grain, even contrarian, if you look at for Elon Musk or any of these people, whoever you follow, Michael Dell, CEO, they have a view and they've stuck with it. And that's why they're successful. I think there's magic to putting blinders on and having a very narrow line of sight, but not being short-sighted, not being myopic. All of these creative experiments and creative destruction has taught me there isn't just one right answer. So I always listen to other people because they may be right as well, and I may be right as well. There's never just one right answer. And second, life isn't a zero-sum game. If you're taking something from a situation, it doesn't mean you're depleting it. It grows. So I feel like I can learn more and more skills without taking away time or taking away from someone else. I think it's a very generative time. You're seeing these metaphors thrown around with artificial general intelligence and generative AI. The whole notion about prompts and tokens is that you get more than you ask. You ask one thing, but you get 10 things. And it's very karmic what's happening right now, because I think people that plug into this fire hose of content, technologies, and the smart minds that are talking about these things, if you really listen, I think you're going to learn much more than you came in for. So I'm in the process of kind of becoming a forever student again, and I'm learning a lot. So I almost feel like my 4-year college is beginning again, because old became new again in 2020. And now that you have LLMs everywhere and you can literally learn a subject matter overnight, there is no end in sight. So I'm really enjoying discovering that. And I think that's how you learn about both sides of the war, both sides of peace, both sides of deals, who's winning, who's losing, or can both parties win, right? And it makes you very accretive rather than depleting when you look at situations.
What is very interesting is that what you mentioned two things, which I just want to reiterate for our listeners. Actions that you take should lead to new generation rather than depletion. And if you take actions that add additional value, even though you might have taken something, it creates a space for new things to grow That's what all of us should be striving for, is how do we leave behind more than what we take? So as we come closer to the end of our time, Karthik, talk a little bit about the importance of purpose. Why is
Sure.
purpose important for you, and how is that driving you?
I think purpose is a loaded metaphor and word. It is very much your moral focus, your ethical beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, your worldview, but it defines something greater than just an immediate objective. And it is what next. So when Bruce Lee used to do martial arts, he put his hand behind a board. He explained that he doesn't see the board. It's not in the way anymore. All he sees is this hand and the board, a transparent object. So in my mind, a purpose is your guiding light. And many people that are creating wealth or defining it or doing philanthropy or wealth transfer or are really good at what they do, sometimes do it for the love and the thrill of the game. But many times they're doing it because it drives them to a greater purpose. I think those of us that find our purpose really can achieve far greater and be discouraged far less, and frankly, help many more people because purpose is infectious. So for me, to answer your question, my purpose was very much to enjoy different things to the fullest and for the thrill of the game. Malcolm Gladwell wrote in Blake that once you have an advantage and once you understand how you were born at a certain time, you had a certain ninja skill, well, that keeps getting bigger and bigger and you grow your sphere of influence. So I took some early advantages in my career and expanded on them, and things I was not good at, but just doing for a day job, I eliminated out of my life. And I think finding my true purpose meant finding a role that I'm doing right now that is within my skills and within my comfort zone, but also stretches me outside my comfort zone and teaches me new skills. My purpose is to learn. My purpose is to grow. And my purpose is to enjoy the thrill of the game. Everyone has a different reason. Now, in wealth, I constantly ask extremely wealthy people and families that are passing on wealth to generations, what is your purpose of this wealth that you've created? And what is it that you'd like to see when you transfer this wealth? And they go, wow, not that many people have asked me that question. Everyone asks me about taxes and capital gains and basis and things like that. And I think that the closer we get to the crux of what the purpose of every activity and every interaction is, the closer we are to the truth.
One word that I really like that you used with the Bruce Lee example, which I've never really thought about it from that perspective. Again, we continuously learn that purpose adds to transparency, and transparency in eliminating obstacles. Because purpose allows you to focus so that you actually go and see beyond the obstacle rather than the obstacle itself. And that to me is such an interesting way to talk about purpose. So, Karthik, thank you very much.
Just one editorial
Yes.
insight. I was referring to outliers, which talked about the head starts we have in life and compounding them, and blink, which is not judging people by what they have on the cover, but really understanding what they're all about. And that tipping point, which really tells us who we really are. Are we a connector? Are we a maven? Or are we a salesperson? And in this archetype, I'm a connector. And it was really good to connect with you, Arthur.
Yeah. As we end, let's have you share your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you live by and you'd like our listeners to gain.
So my name is Kartik, and I always ask people, what makes you tick? Because that's not glib. It doesn't come up that often, and very few people ask the question. I really think if we can figure that out, then we can figure out when things get hard, how we get around it, when we adapt or when we need to achieve a large goal, what problems we need to solve in order to get to it. But it's very much about finding out what makes us tick and hence what drives us forward. And that's what I would say.
Karthik, that's a great pun. Find what makes you tick. And if you can find that deeply rather than the shallowness of what we look at, that has allowed you to then live a life of purpose. Karthik, thank you so very much for being on the podcast. To our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Show up with purpose, find a way to really tick. Karthik, thank you very much.
My pleasure. See you around.